Spotlight is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It seeks to spotlight people, places, and events from around the Diocese of Youngstown that promote the new gospel of joy called for by Pope Francis. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Korda. During this series, we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. And joining me on today's show is Msgr J. Clarke. Welcome to Spotlight.
Hello.
What I'd like us to do is to basically talk about our experiences here in the Diocese of Youngstown, especially as we celebrate this milestone, and talk about some of those people that were influential in our lives as young priests, but also those individuals that were significant in the life of our diocesan church. But before we do that, I'd like to focus briefly on why it's important for us to celebrate and commemorate anniversaries, whether it's in our own personal lives or in the lives of our institutions. Why are anniversaries important?
Well, I've just found, even with my experience so far thinking about our diocesan anniversary, that you look back with appreciation for all that we have had and for what we have accomplished to this very day. And I think the same thing happens, like I would celebrate how many years I've been in a particular parish. It helps me to all of a sudden, well, I remember X number of years ago when I started, and this is how far we've come, or this is where we slipped a little bit. But it gives you perspective, and it gives you hope. It gives you hope for the future based on the successes of the past.
Let's kind of turn the clock back and try to think of those earliest recollections that you have of our diocesan church. What's your first memories of one of our bishops? What do you remember as a young child, perhaps?
Well, when I was born, I lived in Youngstown, Ohio, and our parish church was St. Columba Cathedral, as well as aunts and uncles and grandparents. Everybody belonged to St. Columba. And so I remember going to church as a child, but certainly on a regular basis once I was in first grade at St. Columba School. And so the bishop at the time was Bishop McFadden. And Bishop McFadden was the bishop who confirmed me, but I hardly remember anything about that because that happened in second grade, just about 2 weeks after our first communion. And then I went to St. Columba Grade School for grades 1, 2, and 3, so it would be 1950 through 1953. And that's when Father Malone, Father James Malone, was one of the priests at St. Columba. And I remember in third grade that I believe that's about the time when he became like a superintendent of schools. And so the nuns at St. Columba School would say, oh, Father Malone's coming to see us today, and he's a very important person. So I had early acquaintance with him, and he was a personality in my life.
We're going to talk a little bit more about Bishop Malone in a moment, but let's talk about St. Columba Cathedral and your recollections of the cathedral, of its earlier days.
I remember as a first grader going into this big dark church, and it was a Gothic church, never had the kind of lighting we have in churches now, and I was always fascinated by the flags that were hanging from the center of the ceiling. And one was the American, probably the other was probably a papal flag, but I wondered, how do they get up there and put that there? Because it was so high up.
Sure.
And then one of the cousins was, she was the organist at St. Columba, and Helen Hardy Clarke. And as little kids, we'd be able to go up the back steps to the choir loft once in a while, but not often. And she was a diminutive lady, but she sat at this big organ, and I believe the organ bench kind of slid left and right. And so I remember her and her feet going like crazy, little old lady, her feet going like crazy on the organ pedals. And then I remember at Christmas time asking, it was Christmas, and they had the big statues of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and saying, well, what do they do? Where do they put them after Christmas? We took our nativity set and put it in the attic, but they said it's in that Jesus is in that tabernacle up there. And I couldn't figure how they can get those big statues into that little door. So that's the daydreams of a first and second grader.
Let's talk about your recollections of when you thought about becoming a priest. For us as priests, I think there's someone that's usually significant or a mentor, someone that influences us to encourage us about our vocation. Was there anyone in particular that did that, or how and when did you discover your vocation?
I think started thinking about being a priest in high school, not so much in grade school. I went to St. Columba School and then St. Edward's School, 4th grade through 8th, then Ursuline High School. And I had many classmates. Actually, there were 10 of my high school classmates that were going to go to the seminary. And then there were that many women who were going to go to different religious communities. And I was good friends with one of them, and he said, "Have you ever thought about going to seminary?" And I said, "Well, I suppose I had, but I was not very directed by anybody at the time." And then once I was in high school, I started talking to Monsignor Breen Malone. He was vocation director, and got a lot of encouragement from him. And then by the time I was graduating, I made the decision I was going to go to sea to find out if I had a vocation or not, because the priests and nuns had always said that you're better off to know, to try it and find out if it's not for you, then it should have been for you.
Sure.
So Breen Malone was an important figure. I did not know the parish priest well. I didn't have a lot of a connection with diocesan priests. They were my teachers, but they were just teachers. So.
Yeah. In our last few minutes of our first segment, let's briefly talk about your first experience of Bishop Malone. We're going to spend, I think, our second segment talking more about him, but what was your first impression about Bishop Malone as a bishop?
As a bishop, okay, that would have been into high school, and I don't remember him being at Ursuline High School, but I guess I remember reading about him in the Catholic paper and in various times in the news that he was a highly symbolic figure in the local community, and I don't believe I sat down one-on-one with him until I was going to the seminary, and he called us all down one day, and we all went in to see him for a few minutes before we took off for Cincinnati Seminary. And but it felt pretty impressive being one-on-one with him because he was a public figure at the time, and but it was I remember him being easy to talk to. He was basically encouraging, and just kind of wished us well. And then obviously through the seminary, he would come down and he would gather us all and make sure that we all had something to say to him and that he had something to say to us. So he was, and that time he was one of the few bishops that did that.
Right.
And so everybody felt you guys are very lucky that your bishop is here and he cares for you. And so it was, over the years it matured and went into a good regular relationship.
And we're going to talk about that in a moment. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. In 1850, a Catholic mission was established in Conneaut, making it the first organized Catholic presence in Ashtabula County. It wouldn't be until 1864 that an actual building was purchased to serve St. Mary Church. 8 years before the construction of St. Mary's Parish Church, St. Joseph Church in the city of Ashtabula was established. Parishes in Conneaut have aligned under the title of Corpus Christi Parish, and in the city of Ashtabula as Our Lady of Peace Parish. There are 11 other parishes in that county that serve over 20,000 Catholics. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. In 1847, the parish of St. Columba was established. It would eventually become the Cathedral Church when the diocese was formed in 1943. It was the first parish in the city of Youngstown and in all Mahoning County. The first church built in 1851 was to be on land in Briar Hill that was donated by David Todd, who became the first and so far only governor from Mahoning County. A second church was built in 1864, and in 1897, the third church was erected on the site of the present cathedral. A tragic fire destroyed the cathedral in 1954, but by 1958, a new cathedral was dedicated, which serves Catholics today. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Father J. Clarke, and we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. You know, Father J., before we took a break, we were talking about Bishop Malone. You spent many years of your ministry with him. Let's talk about Bishop Malone. Most of us priests who are our age would have wonderful recollections and experiences of him. He was the one that we remember the most.
Yes.
What can you tell us about Bishop Malone as we celebrate this significant anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown that would have been significant for our diocesan church?
I would say that close-up significance of him started in the seminary when we come to see us, and then my first assignment was in Youngstown, and I was at St. Luke's in Boardman for 2 years. And so I would be very much aware of the Catholic news, both from the television stations that covered things the diocese was doing, and then from the local Vindicator. So I had an awareness of Bishop Malone and who he was. I don't remember his being present in our parish all that often. I don't remember confirmations because I'm not sure when Bishop Hughes entered the picture.
74, I believe.
It was 74?
Yes.
He must, I don't recall that. And so I think once he invited me to step into the Chancery staff, and all of a sudden I was going to be moving from the parish into the Cathedral Rectory at St. Columba. And we had many, many talks before I got there because he had to twist my arm a little bit. But he could do that well, and it didn't hurt because he did it gently, but you got the idea. And so moving into St. Columba, it was a new experience altogether because there were several other priests living there. It was exciting, and in reality, shortly, I got there in June, and he became sick in October. And so right from the start, he and I, spent a lot of time together because when he was, it was recommended that he go to a cancer hospital outside the local area because he had no privacy in the local hospital. He decided to go to Roswell Park in Buffalo, New York, because it would be closer than the other hospital, which would have been in New York City. And since I was the new one on staff, I was kind of the expendable one, and so I went up. I lived in a rectory close by Roswell Park Hospital, and would be with him on a daily basis as he was going through the earliest diagnosis and treatments for his situation. So we would try to get him out of the hospital as often as we could, just go for a ride. But I was obviously there a lot of the times, and greeted the people from the diocese, priests, religious, and lay people that would stop up to see him. And so because of his vulnerability and my being there, we became pretty good close friends. And it was at the same time just the awesomeness of the great turnout of people that supported him, that I would be getting the mail that was coming to him, and we'd come in with a stack every day, and some days he would feel like looking at, and some days he was down. But to have been with him at that very significant time, and then for years after, we had a foundation that most friends would not have.
Let's talk about his presence at the Vatican Council, which would have been significant not only for him personally, but I think for our diocesan church subsequently, because he brought that spirit back to us. What would have been that spirit and that energy that he brought back because of Vatican II that you recall and that you have celebrated in your many years as a priest?
Okay, well, he certainly saw to it that I was ordained in 1970. That was 5 years after the Vatican Council had ended, and he was already doing quite a lot of activities in the home diocese, having speakers come in. And I'm sure he influenced our seminary a lot by directing the seminary the way to go, because he was probably one of the youngest. I think he was the youngest bishop at all four sessions of the council at the time. And he got very excited about some of those visions that the council laid out. And so he had a good way of passing that on. And he came to town back in Youngstown. He was close with the ecumenical movement, personally committed because his family had Methodists in his closest family that he did have. And so once I was in the office with him, I was ecumenical officer for a while, and he was the one that was promoting all that we did as a diocese, which was a lot. And but he was one who was able to speak with the leaders of other denominations, and he had a unique credibility because he gave them time. But he was always a man who gave his time to whatever he believed in. And also, my impressions was that he's a very well-read. He read books. He read all the Catholic periodicals. He could remember what he read, and he could strike up an interesting conversation with just about anyone that had a lot of substance. And so those are some of the first things that I remember of him.
Yeah. We've got about 2 minutes left of our time together. You were with him, obviously, when he retired. Had any of that changed, or had he become just ready to lay aside everything after all those years?
I don't think he was ever ready to lay things aside or lay himself down, because he retired at age 75 and he died at age 80, so in those 5 years. And right before he retired, I was assigned pastor to St. Paul's in Salem, but we stayed good friends over those years. He always had a pile of books and magazines beside his chair, and he loved sitting on his porch and reading. He loved the world of nature that surrounded him. He loved company, and he loved good conversations. And if it wasn't a good conversation, he made them good. He had he kept pretty close contact with some of his high school classmates also. My dad's sister was one of those high school classmates of his also. And but they were, because I was living with him all those years, if they came to his house, I was always part of that gathering too. And you'd hear occasional high school stories. Those were always fun. And,
sure.
That's what.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but we need to take another break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. It was in Dungannon, Ohio, in Columbiana County, that the first group of Catholics settled. St. Philip Neri, the first parish in all northern Ohio, was founded in 1817 under the title of St. Paul's Settlement. It was to visit this settlement that Father Edward Fenwick, the Apostle of Ohio, made his first trip to northern Ohio. 4 years later, Cincinnati was chosen as the see city in the state of Ohio, and Fenwick was selected as the first bishop. Today, St. Philip Neri remains the oldest parish in the Diocese of Youngstown, but it is also one of the smallest. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. The Catholic Diocese of Youngstown was established on May 15, 1943. 2018 marks the 75th anniversary of the diocese. There are 6 counties which make up the Diocese of Youngstown: Ashtabula, Columbiana, Mahoning, Portage, Stark, and Trumbull. There are 5 other dioceses in the state of Ohio, Cincinnati being the oldest, Cleveland, Youngstown's mother diocese, Columbus, Steubenville, and Toledo. Youngstown is the smallest in terms of area and the second smallest in terms of population, yet it has the 3rd highest percentage of people identifying themselves as Catholics. Congratulations, Catholic Diocese, for celebrating 75 years with pride in the past and faith in the future. Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Msgr. J. Clarke, and we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. Before we took a break, we were talking obviously about Bishop Malone, and one of the things that I recall and that many people have remembered was his leadership role in the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. You were with him during all of that. What do you remember as significant for him in that leadership role?
I remember he often said that what was significant, that he was the first diocesan bishop to be elected that was not an archbishop or a cardinal. and that was a great affirmation for him. And especially after these were several years after he had been living with and recuperating from his original cancer diagnosis. And to be so much affirmed that he was elected, and I believe it was on the first ballot. I mean, he was, that lifted him beyond. And so it kind of, it unfolds as that's God's plan. Had he not been a cancer patient, maybe his name would not have been known the way it was. And so, God's plan unfolds in different ways for all of us. But he was very, he didn't flaunt that he was president, but he didn't back up from any challenge. And at that time, when they spoke about, they did a document on the peace pastoral and on the economics of the USA. Very challenging topics that some of us just say, oh, well, let's talk about something else. But he just dove right in, surrounded himself. He used the staff at the Washington office very effectively, and very effectively used the staff here in Youngstown. The Youngstown staff did quite well. You're just proud to be part of that movement of the church that, would that ever happen again? We don't know. Yeah. But
what's interesting too is his role as on the national scene also gave encouragement to those of us to also work in national positions and to use our gifts and talents for the larger church and not just here within the Diocese of Youngstown. And how important is that for us to kind of look at the bigger picture of who we are? Sometimes when we find ourselves in parish life, we're more focused on what's going on there. We're extremely parochial. But why is it that we need to broaden those horizons and look at the bigger picture and the bigger church? Don't you think that's important?
One of the things I think he did effectively, he encouraged all of us priests and supported even religious and encouraged religious and lay people to do continuing education, ongoing education. He encouraged us to do so. He supported the priests that were in high school ministries to go to school in the summertime rather than just filling in a parish, and to get graduate and postgraduate degrees that I think helped a lot of people to expand their understanding of who they were, that they could do a lot more than they would have ever have dreamed of doing on their own. And so I think that was a great asset that he had, and encouraged his staff to be well informed, to go to conferences, to cooperate. We all had our corresponding figures in the Columbus Catholic Conference of Ohio, and he encouraged priests to take active roles in local ministerial association, and he would actually ask if they were doing this just to keep the challenge going. And so he constantly challenged himself and challenged others as well. And I think all that ongoing education had a lot to improve the quality of parish life in our diocese.
And I think another facet of, at least of his encouragement, was that whole ecumenical spirit and attitude. You had mentioned previously of his desire to witness and also to collaborate with members of other Christian denominations, and how important that aspect really is presently in our diocesan church through his efforts. Why is that important for us to continue those efforts?
Well, we're celebrating what started in those years in our local communities, that now the parishes and the clergy of the denominations, we much more easily and readily contact one another, and we've got a common witness that we didn't have before. And that's happening also on the national level, because the major dialogues with the major Christian denominations, that there's a lot more agreement than there ever was. And it wasn't too many years ago when you didn't step your foot inside a Protestant church and they didn't come to Catholic churches. And so there's just an at ease and a comfortableness with who we all are, because we took time to get to know each other. And that was I think that's one of his goals, was to do that. And he did that on the level of judicatory heads, they call it, like bishop to conference head. And then it trickled down.
Yeah. And he was a planner too. I mean, he was an organized person and a planner, and always looking ahead. And as I reflect on our diocesan theme for this anniversary, is we certainly have pride in the past, but we have faith in the future. And that means that we have some plan. Why is it important for us to plan, and how did this all come out through Bishop Malone?
Well, that's a good question. he himself, he had an agenda and a book that he lived by. I'll call it his appointment book, that we didn't have, devices in those days to do that. But he just surrounded himself with people that think creatively, and then he said, well, let's try to do something like that. So he did plan. He was able to catch the spirit of other people, put it with his, and take us all forward. We had a couple studies of parish study, and even when it looked like the decline of clergy was beginning to happen, he was not afraid to look at that, and then he got us looking at it too. And we've had some major, over the diocesan, they had annual every 5 years.
Like a synod or...
synods, that he promoted those. And so the new approach was, let's get grassroots before we get the decisions made. He was, he had a mind that worked.
And the other interesting thing in our last few minutes of our time together was his desire to get the laity involved in the life of the church. He was wonderful with people. And when you mentioned Bishop Malone's name in your parish, there was always an excitement or vibrancy or desire to look forward to him being there or his presence. And he always greeted people very graciously and very well. What does that do for us, or what does that tell us, especially as we experience life in our own parishes and communities and institutions, how important that is to have that involvement of the lay people?
Yeah, I think the involvement with lay people starts with hospitality, and he can make anybody at ease and feel welcome. He most often knew your name, and he remembered something about you that he could remember years later, that he would be able to bring up in conversation and set the other people at ease. And so when he was at a gathering, he would work the room. I'm going to use that, but he's not running for anything, but he would not just sit at a table and wait for people to come up to him. He would go around and make sure that people saw that he was there, and so they felt, I'm important. He saw me. And I think that's part of where we're always encouraged now to bring back the people we've lost, is to strive to be hospitable. That we didn't have to do that for so many years because we were in our ghetto churches. But now we're in suburbs and big cities, and we've got to work to let people know that they are welcome and that they are important. And I think he did that in an exceptionally fine way.
And wonderful words to live by, for sure.
Yes, indeed.
We're unfortunately have to close our program together. Thank you for your time here on Spotlight, but also for the very intimate, personal reflections that you had about one of the significant leaders in our diocesan church, Bishop Malone. And thank you for your ministry these many years, and God bless you and Godspeed.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to being here and glad I came.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Spotlight has been a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.